Good evening, all, and welcome back to Farcical Fears. I watched my crew walk into the ocean, smiling. Something 3,000 feet down called them, and they answered. Ice Fisher. Sonar shows massive creature rising toward him. Lake Mead. Barrels sealed 40 years. Something still alive inside. Alaska. Cursed fish floods boat with thousands of rotting corpses. Pennsylvania. 47 minutes erased. Fourth person appears in photos. Pacific Ocean. Translucent fish with human teeth drives entire crew insane. 5 true fishing horror stories. Police reports, survivors, evidence. New here? Subscribe to Farcical Fears for daily horror that keeps you up at night. Hit the bell. Never miss when darkness calls. What they caught them back. Story 1 starts now. Story 1. The ice fisher, Cameron Walsh, was 400 feet above something that shouldn't exist, and it knew he was there. His hands were frozen to the ice auger, not from cold, but from pure terror. The hole he drilled was glowing, not reflecting light, glowing from below, pulsing like a heartbeat. And through that 10-inch opening, he could hear it breathing. Whatever was down there had been rising for the past 12 minutes, and it was almost at the surface. The ice around him began to crack in perfect circles, each one exactly 6 feet in diameter. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't where his nightmare began. 48 hours earlier, Cameron had driven 8 hours north to Churchill, Manitoba, chasing rumors of monster lake trout beneath the ice. December 2023, the coldest week in 15 years. He'd fished these waters a dozen times, knew every inlet, every drop-off. The forecast promised clear skies and 18 inches of solid ice. Perfect conditions. He arrived on December 16th, set up his gear at a local outfitter, and spent the first day scouting locations. The old-timers at the bait shop warned him about the deep channel on the east side of the bay. Too deep, they said. Nothing down there but darkness. But what happened next changed everything. On his third morning out, December 18th, Cameron ignored the warnings and set up directly over that deep channel. His Garmin fish finder registered 437 feet, deeper than any spot he'd fished before. He drilled his hole at 8:15 a.m., set up his portable shelter, and settled in for a long day. The first 2 hours were completely dead. No marks on the sonar, no bites, nothing. Just the wind howling outside his shelter and the occasional groan of ice settling. Then, at 11:47 a.m. exactly, his screen lit up with something massive at maximum depth. Cameron leaned closer to the display, squinting. The sonar signature didn't move like a fish. It held position at 400 feet, perfectly still for 3 minutes. Then it moved, straight up, 20 feet in 2 seconds. Stopped again. His hands shook as he watched the screen. This was bigger than any fish in these waters. Bigger than the lake trout he'd come for. The shape on the sonar was elongated, maybe 15 feet long, but the density reading made no sense. His fish finder measured returns based on swim bladder density, and this thing registered denser than rock. But what happened next changed everything. It responded to him. Cameron stomped his boot on the ice, testing the thickness, he'd later claim. The shape on his sonar rose another 30 feet in an instant. His breath caught. Coincidence? Had to be. He stomped again, harder this time. The shape rose 40 feet, and the sonar showed something else. Smaller shapes detaching from the main body, dozens of them, spreading outward in a perfect circle beneath him. Cameron's mouth went dry. His auger had pierced the ice, creating a hole 10 inches wide. Not enough to see much, but enough for sound to travel both ways. He knelt beside the opening, his face inches from the dark water, breath fogging in the -30 air. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then he heard it. A clicking sound, rhythmic, deliberate. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click, click. Not random, not natural. It sounded almost mechanical, like sonar pings, but organic somehow. Wet. The clicking echoed up through the hole, and Cameron realized with growing horror that it was getting louder. But what happened next made him realize he'd made a terrible mistake. The clicking was matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. Cameron lurched backward from the hole, scrambling in the snow. His heart hammered at 120 beats per minute. He knew because his fitness watch logged it later. The clicking accelerated, matching perfectly. Click, 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 click. His pulse racing, theirs racing. Because that's what it was, he realized. Communication. Or mimicry. Or something worse, something that suggested intelligence. Then the water in his ice hole began to move, not bubbling like aeration, but swirling in a counterclockwise direction, a whirlpool in miniature. The sonar showed the mass now at 200 feet and rising steadily. Not in bursts anymore, just a smooth, determined ascent. 10 feet every 30 seconds. Cameron grabbed his gear bag, hands shaking so badly he dropped it twice. He had to get off this ice. His truck was parked 400 yards away across the bay. He could make it. But that's when he saw them. Cracks. Not random stress fractures from temperature changes, perfect circles spreading from his fishing hole like ripples in water. Each ring exactly 6 feet in diameter, concentric and deliberate. The ice was 18 inches thick, plenty safe under normal circumstances. But these fractures went deep. Cameron could see dark water through some of them, black against the white ice. And that's when what happened next changed everything. The water in his hole started glowing. A pale blue light, bioluminescent, rising from the depths like a spotlight searching. It pulsed in rhythm with the clicking, which had grown so loud now it vibrated through the ice beneath his boots. Cameron stood paralyzed, watching the glow intensify. The sonar showed the shape at 100 feet, 80 feet, 60. The smaller shapes that had detached earlier were now surrounding him in a perfect circle, each one positioned exactly at the edge of those 6-foot cracks. He should have run then, should have sprinted for his truck and never looked back. But some terrible part of his brain needed to see what was coming, needed to understand. The clicking stopped abruptly, replaced by something infinitely worse. A low-frequency hum he felt in his chest more than heard, resonating at a pitch that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. The glow brightened until it was painful to look at directly. 50 feet. Cameron's watch buzzed. Low heart rate alert. Wait, that made no sense. His heart was pounding. He glanced at the display. 42 beats per minute. Impossible. He felt like he was having a heart attack, but the watch showed his pulse dropping. 40 beats, 35. As if something below was draining it, matching and then reversing his rhythm, pulling him down toward some baseline that wasn't human. 40 feet, 30 feet. Which brings us back to where we started. Cameron Walsh, frozen in place, watching bioluminescent light pulse through a 10-inch hole in the ice. His truck was too far. The ice around him was compromised in ways he didn't understand. And whatever was coming up had been waiting down there, maybe for years, for someone to drill through. At 20 feet, the sonar showed the shape spreading, widening, as if unfurling. Cameron made his choice. He grabbed his ice auger and ran, not toward his truck, but toward thinner ice near the pressure ridge 200 yards east. The glow followed him. He could see it spreading beneath the ice like a spotlight tracking his movement, moving faster than he could run. Behind him, the ice groaned, and something massive pressed against the underside. His watch showed 89 beats per minute now. He'd gone past panic into pure survival mode, adrenaline overriding whatever that thing had been doing to his heart rate. The pressure ridge was where two ice sheets had collided and thrust upward, creating thinner, more unstable ice at the seam. Cameron knew it was dangerous. He didn't care. When he reached it, he didn't hesitate. He jumped with both feet, auger in hand, and crashed through into water so cold it felt like his lungs were being crushed in a vice. But what happened next? He still doesn't understand. The creature stopped. Underwater, eyes open in the murky dark, Cameron saw the glow approaching from the deep channel. Saw its massive shape, though he couldn't make out details, just size and the suggestion of movement. But it stopped at the edge of the pressure ridge, as if some invisible line prevented it from crossing. The glow dimmed. The humming ceased. In the terrible silence, Cameron kicked upward, broke the surface, and hauled himself onto thicker ice near the shore. He crawled 100 yards, hypothermic and shaking violently. A pair of snowmobilers found him 20 minutes later, drawn by his abandoned truck. They wrapped him in blankets, drove him to the hospital in Churchill. He spent 2 days recovering from moderate hypothermia and severe frostbite on 3 fingers. But his body healed. What happened to his mind didn't. The ice where he'd been fishing collapsed that night. Park rangers confirmed it the next morning. A perfect circle, 60 feet across, with water temperature readings at the collapse site showing 15 degrees warmer than surrounding areas. Manitoba Wildlife sent divers down 3 days later to investigate. They found his Garmin fish finder on the bottom, still recording. The last timestamp showed something at 8 feet below the surface, directly under his fishing hole, before the device was crushed. The memory card was corrupted, but technicians recovered one image. Something pale and segmented, too close to the lens to make out clearly, but with what appeared to be hundreds of translucent filaments extending outward. The official report called it equipment malfunction and unstable ice conditions. Cameron moved to Arizona 6 months later. Desert. No deep water, no ice, no lakes within 100 miles of his new apartment. He told himself it was for a fresh start, a new job opportunity. But here's the part that keeps him awake. The part he doesn't tell people because they'd think he was insane. He still hears the clicking, in pipes when water runs, in his refrigerator's ice maker, in the hum of his air conditioner. Always the same rhythm, always just at the edge of hearing, like tinnitus, but with pattern and purpose. His watch still registers those strange heart rate drops, 42 beats per minute exactly, always at 11:47 a.m. Doctors found nothing wrong, said it was stress, PTSD from the incident. But Cameron knows better. And last month, during one of Arizona's rare rainstorms, puddles formed in his backyard. He ignored them at first, let them evaporate in the desert sun. But the next morning, more rain, more puddles. When he looked out his kitchen window, his coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the tile floor. The puddles were arranged in perfect circles, 6 feet in diameter, concentric rings spreading from a central point in his yard where no puddle should form because the ground sloped away. Cameron grabbed his keys and drove to a hotel. He hasn't been back to that apartment. Friends helped him move his things while he waited in the parking lot. One of them asked why there was standing water in his bedroom closet when there were no pipes overhead and no signs of roof damage. Cameron didn't answer. Whatever he woke up under that ice in Churchill didn't just follow him 2,000 miles. It found a way to reach him through something as simple as water. And water Cameron realized too late, is everywhere. In the air we breathe, the food we eat, the 60% of our bodies that's liquid. There's no getting away from it. No place dry enough. The clicking comes every day now, usually around 11:47 a.m., sometimes lasting hours. His heart rate drops on schedule. And yesterday, when he looked in the bathroom mirror after brushing his teeth, he saw something in the reflection of the running faucet behind him. Something pale and segmented. He didn't turn around, just walked out of the room and closed the door. Because deep down, Cameron knows that if he looks directly at it, if he acknowledges it fully, then whatever agreement or boundary kept it at that pressure ridge will break. And this time, there'll be nowhere to run, no thinner ice to crash through. Just him and the thing from 437 feet down, finally finishing what started when he drilled that hole. He should have listened to the old-timers at the bait shop. Some places are deep for a reason. Some darkness is meant to stay undisturbed. But Cameron disturbed it, and now it won't let him forget. Story 2. The Lake Mead Barrel. Derek Paulson's hands were covered in black sludge that smelled like death and chemicals, and he couldn't stop staring at what was emerging from the barrel. Something pale, something that moved wrong, pulsing like it had its own heartbeat, even though it had been sealed in the dark for 40 years. His phone was in his truck, a quarter-mile away across the exposed lake bed. He needed to call someone, needed to run, but his legs wouldn't move, because that's when he heard the camera shudder. Someone on the ridge above was photographing him. Someone had been watching the whole time. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't where his nightmare began. 3 days earlier, August 14th, 2022, Derek had driven from Henderson to Lake Mead with his fishing gear and a cooler full of beer. The drought had been all over the news for months. Water levels at historic lows, boats stranded on dry lake bed, the Hoover Dam intake pipes becoming visible for the first time in 50 years. But for Derek, the drought meant something else. Access. Miles of previously submerged shoreline were now exposed, and with it, fishing spots nobody had reached in decades. He'd been coming to Lake Mead since he was a kid, knew the contours of the old lake bottom from studying maps. He knew exactly where to go. The rangers had cordoned off certain areas after they found the first barrel in May. A mob hit from the 80s, they said. Guy shot in the head, dumped in a 55-gallon drum, left to rot on the lake floor. The discovery had made national news. Speculation about more bodies, more barrels, more secrets buried under decades of water. But what happened next changed everything. Instead of scaring people away, it drew them in. Curiosity seekers, true crime enthusiasts, people with metal detectors combing the newly exposed mud like prospectors. The Park Service was overwhelmed, couldn't patrol everything. Derek wasn't looking for bodies. He was fishing. That's what he told himself as he parked in an unofficial access point 2 miles past Hemingway Harbor, grabbed his rod and tackle box, and hiked across the cracked mud toward a rocky outcrop that used to be underwater. The August heat was crushing, 112 degrees, and the air smelled like algae and mineral deposits. But the fishing would be good. Fish would be concentrated in the deeper channels, desperate for oxygen. Easy pickings. He cast his line for 2 hours without a single bite. The water was murky, low oxygen levels probably, fish staying deeper than he could reach from shore. Derek reeled in and decided to explore further out where the mud transitioned to exposed lake bottom debris. Rocks, driftwood, rusted boat parts, the carcass of what looked like a jet ski half buried in silt. And then he saw it. A barrel. 55-gallon drum, just like the one from May. Rusted metal, partially buried, canted at an angle with one end exposed. Derek's heart hammered. He knew he should call the Rangers. Knew this could be another crime scene. But something made him walk closer. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the thought that this could be his story, his 15 minutes of fame. He could already see the news interviews, his face on CNN. He crouched beside the barrel and saw the metal had corroded through in places, creating gaps large enough to see inside. But what happened next made him realize he'd made a terrible mistake. He could smell it. Through the gaps in the rust, a stench so powerful it made his eyes water. Not the smell of a 40-year-old corpse, which should have been bones and dust by now. This was organic, fresh, wet. Like rotting meat that had been sealed in plastic, preserved in its own decay. Derek pulled his shirt over his nose and leaned closer to one of the gaps. Dark inside, too dark to see clearly. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it through the hole. Something moved. Derek jerked back, dropping his phone in the mud. Impossible. His mind was playing tricks. Heat exhaustion maybe, dehydration. He'd been out here for hours in 100-degree weather. He grabbed his phone, wiped the mud off, and aimed the light again, hands shaking. Inside the barrel, suspended in thick black liquid, something pale and translucent pulsed rhythmically. Not a corpse, not bones. Something that looked almost embryonic, curled in on itself, with too many limbs extending from a central mass. He should have run, should have left the barrel and never looked back. But what happened next changed everything. Derek found a rock, heavy and angular, and started prying at the corroded metal near the barrel's sealed lid. The rust flaked away easily, decades of water damage making the metal brittle. He told himself he just wanted a better look, wanted to confirm what he was seeing before he called anyone. The lid's seal had degraded, and with enough leverage, he could get it open. It took 15 minutes of prying, sweating, and gagging on the smell, before the lid finally gave way, with a sound like tearing metal. Black liquid sloshed out, thick as oil, coating the rocks around the barrel. Derek staggered back, coughing, eyes burning from the fumes. The smell was unbearable now, chemical and organic, like formaldehyde mixed with sewage. When his vision cleared, he looked into the open barrel and his mind tried to reject what he was seeing. A body, or what used to be a body. But the preservation was wrong. The tissue was wrong. Translucent skin pulled tight over elongated bones. The face, if you could call it that, had stretched and distorted, eye sockets too large, jaw extended at an angle that wasn't natural. But that wasn't the worst part. Wrapped around the corpse, growing from it, or feeding on it, or fused with it, were dozens of pale tendrils, each one as thick as a finger, pulsing with fluid movement. And they were growing. Spreading out from the barrel now that it was open, reaching toward the rocks, toward Derek's boots, seeking moisture or heat or something else. Derek scrambled backward, slipping in the mud, and that's when he heard it. The camera shutter. Click, 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 rapid fire, professional. He looked up toward the ridge 100 yards away and saw a figure with a telephoto lens aimed directly at him. Man in dark clothing, face obscured by the camera and a baseball cap. They made eye contact for half a second. Then the figure lowered the camera and walked away, disappearing over the ridge. But what happened next made Derek realize this was much bigger than a mob dumping ground. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. 8 words. Leave the barrel. Walk away. Forget everything. Derek's hands shook as he typed back, "Who is this?" The response came in seconds. Friends of the person in the barrel, "We've been watching it for 2 years. You shouldn't have opened it." 2 years. That meant they knew the barrel was there before the drought exposed it. Which meant they had sonar, surveys, probably divers. An operation. Derek looked back at the barrel, and the tendrils had spread further. Some of them now 6 feet long, creeping across the rocks like roots seeking soil. The black liquid was evaporating in the heat, but leaving behind residue that shimmered with an oily iridescence. His phone buzzed again. This time a photo. Derek looking down at the barrel, his face clearly visible, taken from the ridge. The message below it. "We know who you are. Derek Paulson, 4782 Sandstone Avenue, Henderson. Silver Tacoma. License 8KQ479. You have a daughter, Mackenzie, age 7. Walk away." Derek's blood went cold. They knew where he lived, knew his daughter's name. He grabbed his fishing gear and ran, not looking back, his boots slipping on the algae-covered rocks. His truck was parked past the ridge, down a service road the rangers didn't patrol. When he reached it, his hands were shaking so badly he dropped his keys twice before getting the door open. He threw his gear in the back and started the engine, checking his rearview mirror constantly. A black sedan was parked 50 yards away, windows tinted, engine running. It hadn't been there when Derek arrived. As he pulled onto the service road, the sedan followed at a distance, not trying to hide, just maintaining presence. Derek drove faster, kicking up dust, reaching the main highway within minutes. The sedan didn't follow onto the public road, just stopped at the turnoff and waited. Derek drove straight home, locked every door and window, and sat at his kitchen table trying to process what he'd seen. The body in the barrel hadn't been dumped in the 80s. It had been changed by something, transformed or infected or preserved in a way that defied normal decomposition. And whoever had dumped it knew about it, was monitoring it, maybe studying it. His phone buzzed constantly for the next hour. Unknown numbers, no messages, just missed calls that he didn't answer. After Farisal, 9:47 p.m., someone knocked on his door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Derek looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in dark suits standing on his porch. Not police, not rangers. They looked federal, but something about their posture was wrong. Too still, too patient. One of them reached into his jacket and pulled out a wallet, flipping it open toward the peephole. The ID said, Department of Interior, Containment Division. A department Derek had never heard of. He didn't open the door, just watched through the peephole as they stood there for 2 minutes in complete silence. Then one of them placed a business card on his doormat, and they walked back to their sedan, which Derek hadn't even seen park. The card had no name, just a phone number and 7 words printed in small text. Discuss what you saw. Become a problem. Derek burned the card in his kitchen sink that night. Deleted the photos he'd taken of the barrel, factory reset his phone, and told his wife they were taking Mackenzie on a camping trip out of state for the next week. She asked questions he couldn't answer. They left the next morning, drove to Colorado, stayed at a campground with no cell service. When they returned 9 days later, nothing seemed wrong. No more messages, no more cars watching his house. But what happened next proved they were still paying attention. Derek's neighbor mentioned that some utility workers had been checking gas lines in the neighborhood while they were gone. Spent an entire day parked in front of Derek's house, running equipment. But the gas company had no record of any work orders for that address. Derek checked his home office, and everything looked normal. Until he reviewed his laptop's login history. Someone had accessed it while he was away, spent 42 minutes going through his files, then logged out. They'd searched for any mentions of Lake Mead, any photos, any documents. They'd even checked his cloud storage. Derek never went back to Lake Mead. sold his fishing gear on Craigslist, deleted his social media accounts, and told anyone who asked that he'd lost interest in the hobby. But that wasn't what haunted him. What kept him awake was checking the news every day, searching for reports of another barrel being found. Because he remembered what his phone's GPS had logged before he reset it. That barrel wasn't alone. He'd walked past at least 2 others partially buried in the mud, farther out toward what used to be the deeper water. He hadn't investigated them, hadn't even gotten close enough to confirm what they were. But they were there. And if those barrels contained the same thing, the same preservation, the same spreading tendrils, then the drought was revealing something that was never meant to surface. Something that an entire government department existed to contain. Derek started researching Lake Mead's history, going back decades. He found dozens of unexplained incidents. Divers disappearing in the 70s. Strange sonar, readings in restricted zones. A military operation in 1981 that cordoned off the entire lake for 3 days with no public explanation. The mob dumping ground story was convenient, easy to believe. But what if it was a cover for something else? 6 months after the incident, Derek received a package with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a printed note. "Stop looking. This is your final warning." He destroyed the USB drive without plugging it in, afraid of what files might be on it or what malware it could contain. But the fact that they knew he'd been researching, that they'd tracked his search history even after he'd taken precautions, meant their surveillance was ongoing and sophisticated. Derek moved his family to Oregon in March 2023. New city, new job, new identity. He told people they wanted a fresh start, better schools for Mackenzie. But the real reason was simpler. He needed to be far from Lake Mead, far from whatever was in those barrels, and far from the people who would do anything to keep it secret. The drought continues. Water levels keep dropping. And Derek knows there are more barrels out there, dozens of them, waiting to be exposed. Each one containing something that's been sealed in the dark for 40 years, changing, growing, waiting. He still gets text messages sometimes. Random numbers, never any words, just photos. Lake Mead shoreline, the exact spot where he found the barrel. In the photos, the barrel is gone, removed. But the rocks around where it sat are stained black. And in the high-resolution images, if you zoom in carefully, you can see the ground is still moving, still pulsing. Whatever was in that barrel had already spread before they contained it again. And Derek knows with absolute certainty that when Lake Mead finally dries up completely, when the drought exposes the deepest parts of the old lake bed, they're going to find something that can't be contained anymore. Something that's been waiting down there since before the mob ever used the lake as a dumping ground. Something that the Containment Division has been monitoring for decades. And when that happens, his warning won't matter. Because by then, it'll already be too late. Story 3. The Spirit Fish. Vincent Haro watched thousands of rotting fish materialize in the hold of his boat, appearing faster than physics should allow, the stench so overpowering that his crew was vomiting over the rails. The Nordic Dawn was listing 15 degrees to starboard, taking on weight that shouldn't exist, 80 miles from the nearest shore. His deckhand Joseph was screaming something in Tlingit. Words Vincent didn't understand, but recognized as prayer or curse or both. The albino halibut was still on the deck where they'd left it 3 hours ago, eye sockets empty but somehow still watching. And Vincent knew with absolute certainty that this was payment for his greed. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't where his nightmare began. 4 days earlier, April 19, 2021, the Nordic Dawn had left Sitka Harbor at dawn, heading for the deep channels off Kruzof Island. Vincent had been running commercial fishing operations for 16 years, knew these waters like most people knew their own backyards. Halibut season was competitive, and he'd invested everything in new equipment, better nets, a loan he couldn't afford if this season went bad. His crew consisted of 3 men: Joseph Kadiak, his deckhand, and the only Alaska native on the boat; Marcus Chen, engineer; and Thomas Wickham, a green hire on his first season. They were chasing reports of monster halibut in the deeper trenches, the kind of catches that made or broke a season. The first 2 days were decent. They pulled up respectable numbers, nothing spectacular, but enough to cover fuel and wages. On the 3rd day, they pushed farther out, following a hunch Vincent had about a particular trench that rarely got fished. The sonar showed promising activity at 4 and 20 feet. They dropped nets and waited. When they pulled them up 3 hours later, the catch was better than Vincent had seen in years. Halibut, lingcod, rockfish, hundreds of pounds. But what happened next changed everything. Tangled in the net among the thrashing fish was something that made Joseph take 3 steps backward and start muttering in his native language. An albino halibut, pure white, nearly 6 feet long, with eyes that looked disturbingly human in their structure and expression. The creature wasn't thrashing like the others. It lay perfectly still, watching them with those wrong eyes, gills flaring in a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing words. "Cut it loose," Joseph said immediately, his voice tight. "Right now, Vincent. Cut the net and let it go back." Vincent hesitated. The fish was massive, easily 200 pounds, worth serious money. "It's just a genetic abnormality, albinism. We see it in wildlife all the time." "That's not albinism," Joseph said, and there was something in his voice that made Marcus and Thomas stop working. "That's a spirit fish. Kushtaka. My grandmother told stories. You catch one, you release it with respect, or the ocean takes back everything you've ever pulled from it." Vincent had heard the legends. Kushtaka, the land otter men of Tlingit mythology, shape-shifters that dwelled in the water and lured fishermen to their deaths. But Vincent didn't believe in legends. He believed in market prices and loan payments. "It's going in the hold with everything else," he said, and started dragging the albino halibut toward the deck hatch. Joseph grabbed his arm. "Vincent, listen to me. I've fished these waters my whole life. My father, his father, 8 generations back. We don't take spirit fish, ever. The ocean is watching right now, and if you put that thing in the hold, it will balance the scales." "Superstition," Vincent said, pulling free. "We're keeping it." He hauled the fish across the deck. It didn't fight, didn't flop, just stared at him with those human eyes until he dropped it down into the refrigerated hold with the rest of the catch. The moment it hit the ice below, Vincent swore he heard a sound like a woman's voice singing. Just for a second, then nothing. Joseph spent the rest of the day at the far end of the boat, refusing to help process the catch. He kept staring at the water, then at Vincent, then back at the water. "You should throw it back before midnight," he said as the sun set. "After midnight, the ocean decides the price." But Vincent didn't listen. They stored the catch, plotted course back toward Sitka, and settled in for the night. Marcus and Thomas bunked below. Joseph stayed on deck despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket, watching the water. Vincent took first watch in the wheelhouse, checking instruments, sipping coffee, calculating profits. At 11:47 p.m., Joseph knocked on the wheelhouse door. "Throw it back," he said. "Please. I'm begging you as someone who sailed with you for 8 years. The water is wrong. Listen." Vincent stepped out onto the deck and immediately knew what Joseph meant. The ocean was too quiet. No waves lapping the hull, no wind, no seabirds, even though they were only 80 miles offshore. Complete silence except for the engine's low rumble. And the water itself looked wrong. Too black, too still, like oil instead of seawater. "It's just calm weather," Vincent said, but his voice lacked conviction. At exactly midnight, the fish started appearing. It began with a sound in the hold, a wet, heavy thump, like something large had fallen. Then another, then dozens more in rapid succession. Vincent and Joseph rushed to the hatch and looked down. The hold was filling with fish. Not the fish they'd caught. Those were still there on ice where they'd left them. New fish, dead fish, rotting fish. Salmon with eyes missing, halibut split open and crawling with decay, lingcod with flesh sloughing off bones. They appeared from nowhere, materializing in midair and dropping onto the pile, each one adding weight to the boat. "What the hell?" Vincent breathed. And that's when he realized every fish appearing in the hold was a species they'd caught over the past 3 days. Hundreds of them. Thousands. As if every fish they'd ever pulled from the ocean was returning. Marcus stumbled up from below, woken by the noise. "Captain, what's happening? Why does the boat feel heavy?" The Nordic dawn was listing now, tilting to starboard as impossible weight accumulated in the hold. Vincent could hear the hull groaning, metal stressed beyond tolerance. Thomas emerged next, took one look into the hold, and started vomiting over the rail. The smell was unbearable. Death and rot and something else. Something chemical and wrong, like the ocean itself was decomposing. Joseph grabbed Vincent by the shoulders. "The ocean is taking back what you stole. It's balancing the scales. Every fish we've caught, it's returning them. The boat's going to sink under the weight. We're 80 miles from shore, Vincent. Do you understand? We're going to die out here unless you give back the spirit fish." But Vincent couldn't process it. His mind kept trying to find rational explanations. Hallucination, gas leak, contaminated food. This couldn't be real. Fish don't materialize from thin air. The laws of physics don't break because of a myth. The boat listed further. 15 degrees now. Equipment was sliding across the deck. The hold was so full that fish were spilling out onto the deck, a tide of rotting flesh that made walking treacherous. And they kept coming. Appearing faster now, dozens per second, a waterfall of decay that defied explanation. "Vincent!" Joseph screamed. "The spirit fish! Give it back!" Vincent stumbled across the tilting deck to the hold hatch. He could see the albino halibut at the bottom of the pile, still pristine white among the rot, those human eyes staring up at him. The boat groaned and listed another 5 degrees. Marcus was on the radio calling Mayday, but the radio just crackled with static. No response, no signal, as if the ocean had cut them off from the world. Vincent made his choice. He climbed down into the hold, wading through knee-deep, rotting fish, gagging on the stench, and grabbed the albino halibut. It was impossibly heavy, easily 300 pounds now instead of 200. And ice cold to the touch. He dragged it up the ladder, across the deck, Joseph helping him, both of them slipping on decay. When they reached the rail, Vincent hesitated one last time. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the fish, to the ocean, to whatever was listening. Then he threw it overboard. The moment the albino halibut hit the water, everything stopped. The fish stopped appearing. The silence broke with a rush of wind and waves. The boat's list began to correct as weight vanished from the hold. Vincent looked down and watched thousands of rotting fish dematerialize, evaporating like mist, until only their original catch remained on ice exactly as they'd left it. The ocean returned to normal. Black water became blue-gray. The radio crackled back to life with the Coast Guard responding to their mayday. Joseph collapsed against the rail, breathing hard. "You should have listened." But that wasn't the end of it. Vincent knew that even as relief flooded through him. Because when he'd held that albino halibut, just before throwing it back, he'd felt something move inside it. Not organs, not bones. Something that squirmed and pulsed like the fish was pregnant with something that wasn't fish at all. They sailed back to Sitka in silence. The catch they'd kept was worth good money. Vincent paid off enough of his loan to stay in business. But what happened next made him wish he'd sold the boat instead. Vincent started having dreams. Every night, the same dream. He was underwater, drowning, looking up at the surface, and something pale was circling him. Something with his face. Something that had his memories and his voice, but wasn't him. It swam closer each night. And in the dreams, Vincent understood that it was waiting for permission, waiting for him to give up, to accept the exchange. The ocean had let him live, but it wanted payment. Not his life, his identity, his self. He consulted Joseph, who put him in touch with a Tlingit elder named Margaret. She listened to his story, looked at photos of the albino halibut that Thomas had taken, and sat in silence for 10 minutes before speaking. "The spirit fish doesn't die," she said finally. "You threw it back, but it tasted you. Your sweat, your breath, your greed. It knows you now." In the old stories, when a fisherman breaks faith with the ocean, the Kushtaka claims them slowly, first in dreams, then in reflection, then in flesh. You'll see yourself in water, but it won't move like you move. That's when you know it's coming. Vincent didn't believe her, couldn't believe her. But 3 weeks later, he was washing his hands in the galley sink, and his reflection blinked a full second after he did. The next week, he saw his reflection smile when he wasn't smiling. His crew started asking if he was okay, said he looked different somehow. Thinner, paler, like something was wearing his skin from the inside. The Nordic Dawn made it back to port on June 3rd, 2021. Vincent Haro didn't. His body washed ashore near Kruzof Island on June 6th, 3 days after the boat docked. The Coast Guard report listed cause of death as drowning, but that didn't explain several disturbing facts. Vincent's lungs were full of salt water, but also full of something else. Small white eggs, hundreds of them, each one containing a translucent embryo that looked disturbingly human in structure. The coroner ruled it a parasitic infection of unknown origin and sealed the report. Joseph Kadiak quit commercial fishing the day they found Vincent's body. He moved inland to Juneau, took a job at a hardware store, and refuses to go near the ocean. Because he was the one who identified Vincent's body, and he saw something the coroner's report didn't mention. Vincent's eyes had changed. They were still his eyes, technically. But they looked different. More like the eyes of the albino halibut. Human in structure, but wrong in expression. Like something else was looking out through them. And when Joseph walked past the body on the examination table, he swears Vincent's mouth moved. Didn't speak, didn't breathe, but moved like it was trying to form words. The Nordic Dawn was sold at auction. New owners, new crew, new name. They don't fish the deep trenches off Kruzof Island. Nobody does anymore. The Tlingit community passed word to stay away from those waters, said the spirits were restless, said the ocean was still hungry. But commercial fishing doesn't stop for legends, and every season, boats go out to those deep channels chasing big catches. Most come back, but every year, 1 or 2 don't. And when the Coast Guard finds the boats, they're always the same. Empty. No crew, no sign of struggle. Just the holds full of ice and perfectly preserved fish. And always, somewhere on the boat, they find one albino fish that shouldn't be there. different species each time. Cod, salmon, rockfish, but always pure white, always with eyes that look too human. The ocean doesn't forget, Joseph says. It keeps accounts. And when you take something that was never meant to be taken, it finds a way to balance the scales. Vincent learned that. He just learned it too late. Story 4. The Missing 47 Minutes. Marcus Chen was staring at GoPro footage that showed a fourth person sitting in their boat. Someone who shouldn't exist. Someone whose face was blurred in every single frame, but whose reflection in the water was crystal clear. His phone kept buzzing with text messages from Ethan Porter, his best friend since college, the same Ethan who'd been missing for 6 months. The texts all said the same thing. "Do you remember me yet?" Marcus's hands shook so badly he had to set the laptop down, because the worst part wasn't the footage or the messages. The worst part was that he was starting to remember, and what he remembered didn't make sense. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't where his nightmare began. 11 months earlier, June 12, 2019, 3 friends drove to Waverly Reservoir in rural Pennsylvania for a night fishing trip. Marcus Chen, 24, software developer. James O'Reilly, 26, accountant. Ethan Porter, 23, grad student. They'd been planning it for weeks, a chance to escape their desk jobs and reconnect before adult life pulled them in different directions. The reservoir was remote, tucked into the Allegheny Mountains, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by a narrow service road that hadn't been maintained in years. Perfect for getting away from everything. They arrived at 6:47 p.m., according to Marcus's dash cam, parked near the boat launch, and spent an hour setting up gear. Marcus had brought his GoPro Hero 7, mounting it on the bow of James's aluminum fishing boat to document the trip. The camera was set to record continuously with a 128 gigabit memory card, enough for 12 hours of footage. They launched at 7:52 p.m., motored out to the middle of the reservoir where the depth finder showed 60 feet, and started fishing as the sun set. The first 2 hours were exactly what they'd hoped for. Beer, conversation, terrible jokes, the kind of easy friendship that doesn't require effort. The GoPro captured all of it. Marcus talking about his new job, James complaining about his girlfriend, Ethan discussing his thesis on quantum entanglement. They caught a few bass, nothing spectacular. The stars came out, incredibly bright this far from city lights. At 10:15 p.m., they noticed lights across the water. "Is that another boat?" James asked, pointing toward the far shore where 3 bright lights hovered just above the tree line. Marcus squinted. "Maybe a house? But I didn't see any houses when we drove in." The lights were perfectly spaced, forming a triangle, and they didn't move like boat lights or car headlights. They just hung there, steady and white, maybe half a mile away. Ethan pulled out his phone and tried to zoom in for a photo, but his camera couldn't focus properly. The lights appeared as blurred smears, no matter how he adjusted the settings. "That's weird," Ethan muttered. "My phone never does this." They watched the lights for several minutes. Then, at 10:23 p.m., according to the GoPro timestamp, something changed. The lights began moving closer, not in a straight line, but in a strange pattern, weaving back and forth across the water's surface. And as they moved, the sounds of the night changed. The crickets and frogs that had been providing constant background noise suddenly stopped. Complete silence, except for the gentle lap of water against the boat. "I don't like this," James said. And there was an edge to his voice that Marcus had never heard before. James wasn't someone who got spooked easily. Marcus felt it too. a pressure in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm. But the sky was clear. The lights were closer now, maybe a quarter-mile away, and Marcus could see they weren't reflecting off the water properly. Normal lights would create a reflection, a path across the surface. These lights seemed to stop at the water's surface, as if the lake itself was absorbing them. "Let's head back," Marcus said, reaching for the outboard motor's pull cord. But what happened next changed everything. The motor wouldn't start. Marcus pulled the cord 6 times, flooding the engine, but nothing. James tried. Still nothing. The battery-powered trolling motor wouldn't respond either, just clicking uselessly. Their phones, which had all been at full battery, were now showing 12%, 8%, and 5% respectively, draining in real time as they watched. Ethan's phone died completely, screen going black. The lights were less than 100 yards away now, and Marcus could see they weren't coming from any physical source. No boat, no aircraft, just pure white light hanging in the air. The pressure increased until Marcus's ears popped. James started muttering something, maybe a prayer, maybe just panic. Ethan stood up in the boat, which was dangerous, and said something Marcus didn't understand. Words in a language he didn't recognize. Marcus turned to look at Ethan, to ask what he'd just said. And that's when his memory stops. According to the GoPro footage, the timestamp jumps from 11:47 p.m. to 12:34 a.m. 47 minutes gone. But the battery life on the GoPro didn't drop proportionally. It should have used roughly 8% of its charge during those 47 minutes. Instead, it used less than 1%, as if the camera had been paused or the time had somehow compressed. When the footage resumes at 12:34 a.m., everything is different. Marcus, James, and Ethan are in different positions in the boat. Marcus is now at the stern instead of the bow. James is holding a fishing rod he hadn't been using before. Ethan is sitting perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, staring at something off camera. Their clothes are dry, even though Marcus remembers, or thinks he remembers, that it had started raining. The bait on their hooks is fresh, which makes no sense because it had been in the water for over 2 hours and should be waterlogged or gone. And there's someone else in the boat. A 4th person sitting between James and Ethan, partially visible in the frame. You can see their torso, their hands resting on their knees, part of their shoulder, but their face is completely blurred, like someone had taken a Gaussian blur filter and applied it just to that specific area. The blur doesn't move. It's not like motion blur or focus issues. It's deliberate, as if something was preventing the camera from capturing that person's features. Marcus didn't notice any of this at the time. When he woke up, or came back, or whatever had happened at 12:34 a.m., he was aware of being in the boat, aware of James and Ethan, aware that they needed to get back to shore. The motor started on the first pull. Their phones were working again, showing a 100% battery. The lights across the water were gone. They drove back to the boat launch in silence, loaded their gear, and went home. None of them talked about what happened. It was like they'd agreed without speaking that it was better not to discuss it. Marcus didn't review the GoPro footage until 3 days later. He'd been feeling strange since the trip, experiencing moments of confusion where he'd find himself in his apartment with no memory of how he got there. Time would skip. He'd be eating breakfast, and then suddenly it would be afternoon with no memory of the hours between. His girlfriend asked if he was okay, said he'd been acting distant. He couldn't explain it to her, because he didn't understand it himself. When he finally downloaded the GoPro footage to his laptop and started watching, everything seemed normal until the timestamp jump. Marcus watched that section 15 times, frame by frame, trying to understand what he was seeing. The fourth person appeared in exactly 8 frames during the 15 minutes of footage after 12:34 a.m. Always blurred, always in a slightly different position, as if they'd been moving normally, but the camera only caught glimpses. But what happened next made Marcus realize this was much worse than a camera malfunction. He noticed the reflections in the water. The boat's hull, the fishing rods, Marcus, James, and Ethan were all reflected correctly on the water's surface, distorted by ripples, but recognizable. But the fourth person's reflection was perfect, crystal clear, no blur at all, and the face in the reflection wasn't human. Marcus grabbed his phone with shaking hands and called James. "Did you review the footage from Waverly?" "What footage?" James asked. "From our fishing trip, the GoPro." There was a long pause. "Marcus, what are you talking about? We haven't been fishing in months." Marcus's stomach dropped. "James, we went to Waverly Reservoir on June 12th. You, me, and Ethan. Your boat. We saw the lights." Another pause. Longer this time. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me carefully. We've been talking about going fishing for months, but we haven't actually gone. You've been mentioning this trip, but it never happened. I'm worried about you, man. Maybe you should see someone." Marcus hung up and immediately called Ethan. No answer. He tried again, straight to voicemail. He sent a text. "Call me about Waverly." The text showed as delivered, but not read. Marcus opened his Photos app and scrolled to June 12th. There were photos from that day. Him, James, and Ethan at the boat launch. In the boat, holding fish. But in every single photo there was a blur, sometimes in the background, sometimes closer. And in one photo, a selfie Marcus didn't remember taking, all 3 of them were in the frame, smiling at the camera. Behind them, in the water, was a reflection that showed 4 people. Marcus spent the next week trying to make sense of it. He reviewed his credit card statements and found a charge for bait and ice from a convenience store near Waverly on June 12th. He checked his car's GPS history and saw a trip to those exact coordinates. He found a receipt in his glove compartment from the gas station in Waverly, timestamp 6:23 p.m. on June 12th. The trip had happened. He had physical proof. But James didn't remember, and Ethan wasn't responding. On June 22nd, Marcus drove to Ethan's apartment. He knocked for 5 minutes before the landlord appeared and asked what he wanted. "I'm looking for Ethan Porter," Marcus said. The landlord gave him a strange look. "Ethan moved out 3 weeks ago. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Left most of his stuff, just disappeared." 3 weeks ago would have been early June, right before the fishing trip. Marcus felt cold despite the summer heat. He drove to James's house and found him in the driveway washing his truck. "James, I need you to try to remember. Please. Waverly Reservoir, June 12th. The lights on the water." James's face went blank for a moment. Then he blinked rapidly. There's something, like a dream. But it can't be real because..." He trailed off, staring at nothing. "Because what?" Marcus pressed. "Because if it was real, that would mean we brought something back." Those words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt something shift in his perception, like a door opening in his mind to a room he'd kept locked. Memory fragments surfaced. Not of the 47 minutes, those were still gone, but of what happened after. Getting back to the boat launch, loading the gear, driving home, and a 4th person in his rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat where no one should be. Face always just out of focus. "He's been texting me," Marcus said quietly. "The 4th person, messages from Ethan's number, but it's not Ethan. It keeps asking if I remember." James's face went white. I've been seeing him. In reflections. Mirrors, windows, puddles. Always blurred except in the reflection. Last night I saw him standing in my bedroom. But when I turned on the light, nothing was there. But the reflection in my TV screen. He was still there. They decided to go back to Waverly together, to try to understand what they'd brought back or what they'd left behind or whatever had happened during those missing 47 minutes. They drove up on July 3rd, arriving at the boat launch at dusk. But what happened next proved they'd made a terrible mistake. The reservoir looked wrong. The water level had dropped significantly despite no drought, exposing 20 feet of shoreline that should have been submerged. And written in the mud, visible from the boat launch, were symbols. Not English, not any language Marcus recognized, but somehow he could understand their meaning. They opened the door. They let us through. They cannot close it. James grabbed Marcus's arm. We need to leave, right now. But before they could get back to the car, Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from Ethan's number. I'm already in the car. Marcus and James spun around to look at the car, parked 50 yards away. Someone was sitting in the back seat. They could see the silhouette through the rear window, perfectly still. They ran. Not to the car. They couldn't go back to the car, but into the woods paralleling the access road. Behind them, they heard a car door open, heard footsteps on gravel, heard a voice that sounded like Ethan but wrong, distorted, calling their names. They ran for 20 minutes until they reached the main highway and flagged down a passing truck. The driver, an older man, took one look at their faces and didn't ask questions, just drove them to the nearest town. Marcus filed a missing persons report for Ethan on July 4th. The police found Ethan's car parked at a rest stop 30 miles from Waverly. His wallet and phone were inside. There were muddy footprints leading from the car toward the woods, but they disappeared after 50 feet, as if whoever made them had simply stopped walking and vanished. The police searched the woods for 3 days and found nothing. The case went cold within weeks. James moved to California 2 months later. Wouldn't tell anyone why, just packed up and left. Marcus tried to move on with his life, but the messages kept coming. Texts from Ethan's number, always when Marcus was alone. Do you remember me yet? I was there the whole time. You opened the door. We need to go back. And Marcus's memory was changing. He was starting to remember pieces of those 47 minutes. Flashes that might be real or might be false memories planted by whatever they'd encountered. He remembered being underwater, drowning but still able to breathe. He remembered the lights coming closer, entering the boat, entering them. He remembered a voice explaining that they'd been chosen, that doors existed between places, between times, between states of being, and that they'd unknowingly opened one. And he remembered agreeing to something, making a choice or a promise or a trade. But he couldn't remember what. 3 months ago, Marcus received a package. No return address, just a USB drive and a note in handwriting he recognized as Ethan's. This is what you need to see. Marcus plugged the drive into an isolated laptop, not connected to the internet, afraid of viruses. The drive contained a single video file. It was the missing 47 minutes. Marcus hasn't told anyone what's on that video. He can't. Because what it shows isn't possible, violates every law of physics and logic, and would make him sound insane if he tried to explain. But he knows now what happened. Knows what they let through. Knows why Ethan is gone, and why James is hiding in California, and why Marcus himself is being followed by something that wears a blurred face and speaks with Ethan's voice. The fourth person in the boat wasn't a person at all. It was a door, a threshold between their reality and somewhere else. And during those 47 minutes, they didn't just encounter it, they passed through it. All three of them died on Waverly Reservoir on June 12, 2019. But something sent them back. Copies or echoes or reconstructions close enough to the originals that they didn't notice at first. Close enough to live their lives and interact with people and maintain the illusion of continuity. But the real Ethan is still on the other side. And the thing that's sending Marcus messages isn't Ethan, it's whatever made the trade. It wants them to go back to Waverly, wants them to open the door fully, wants them to remember the agreement they made when they were drowning in water that wasn't water, surrounded by lights that weren't lights, being offered a choice by something that wasn't alive or dead, but somewhere in between. Marcus checks his photos every day. In recent pictures of himself, sometimes he can see it. A blur at the edge of the frame, a reflection that doesn't match. And last week, he caught something terrible. In a mirror selfie, his face was slightly blurred. Just barely, just enough to notice if you were looking carefully. It's spreading. Whatever happened at Waverly is still happening, slowly transforming him into another door, another threshold. He knows he should go back, should try to close what they opened. But he's terrified that going back means crossing over permanently, becoming like Ethan, trapped on the other side while something else wears his face in this reality. So Marcus waits, documenting everything, saving the footage and the photos and the messages, hoping someone will find them and understand. Because here's the terrible truth he's realized. There were never 3 friends in that boat. There were always 4. The 4th person has been with them for years, maybe their entire lives, waiting for them to notice, waiting for them to open the door. And when Marcus reviews old photos now, photos from college, from high school, even from childhood, he can see the blur, always there, always watching, always waiting. The missing 47 minutes weren't when they lost time. It was when they remembered, when they saw what's always been there. And once you see it, once you know it exists, it knows you know. And then it comes for you. Marcus received a text this morning. Ethan's number. Just 2 words. Tonight. Midnight. He doesn't know if he'll go. But deep down, he knows he doesn't have a choice. He's been going back to Waverly every night for the past 2 weeks. He just doesn't remember the drive. Story 5. The Deepwater Trawler. Captain Reyna Cortez was locked in the cabin of the Pacific Horizon, watching through salt-streaked windows as her entire crew walked single file toward the port rail, their movements synchronized like a choreographed dance. They were smiling, all 8 of them, smiling with an expression that wasn't quite human anymore, eyes distant and dreamy, as if something wonderful was calling them home. Behind them on the deck, the translucent fish they'd pulled from 3,200 feet writhed in its death throes, bioluminescent organs pulsing with light that hurt to look at directly. Reyna had sealed herself in 30 minutes ago when the first crew member started humming. Now she could only watch as they climbed over the rail, one by one, and stepped into the Pacific Ocean 200 miles from shore. The water was 52 degrees. They wouldn't last 15 minutes, but they were still smiling as they disappeared beneath the surface. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't where her nightmare began. 6 days earlier, March 8, 2024, the Pacific Horizon departed Newport, Oregon on what should have been a routine deep-sea trawling operation. The vessel was a commercial fishing boat, 120 feet long, equipped for extended operations in the North Pacific. Reyna had been captaining trawlers for 19 years, following in her father's footsteps, her grandfather's before him. This was the family business, and she was good at it. Her crew consisted of 8 experienced fishermen, most of them with a decade or more on the water. Marcus Holland, first mate. David Sung, engineer. Brothers Rafael and Miguel Santos, deckhands. Thomas Perkins, net specialist. James Lee, cook. And 2 seasonal workers, Brad Yamamoto and Kyle Henderson, both in their mid-20s but reliable. The contract was for Pacific cod and rockfish, standard for this time of year. But the fishing had been poor closer to shore, unseasonably so. And after 3 days of disappointing hauls, Reyna made the decision to push farther out and deeper down. The sonar was showing promising activity at coordinates that would put them 200 miles offshore in waters that reached 3,500 feet deep. Deeper than they usually fished, but within the boat's capabilities. They arrived at the coordinates on March 11th at 4:23 a.m. The sea was calm, unusually so for March in the North Pacific. No wind, no chop, just a glassy surface that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The crew commented on it, said it was eerie how quiet everything was. No seabirds even though they'd been following the boat for days. Just silence and dark water. "Let's make this quick," Marcus said. And Reyna heard something in his voice she'd never heard before. Unease. Marcus had been fishing these waters for 23 years and wasn't someone who spooked easily. But something about this location felt wrong to him. Felt wrong to Reyna too, though she couldn't articulate why. Just a pressure in the air, a heaviness that made breathing slightly harder. They deployed the trawl net at 5:10 a.m., sending it down to 3,200 feet, the deepest they'd ever fished. The winch groaned under the weight of the cable paying out, thousands of feet of it, until finally the net reached target depth and they began the slow drag across the ocean floor. Standard procedure was to trawl for 3 to 4 hours before hauling in, giving the net time to fill. But what happened next changed everything. At 6:47 a.m., exactly 97 minutes after deployment, every fish finder and sonar screen on the boat went haywire. Not a malfunction, David confirmed that, but a genuine reading of something massive moving beneath them. The screens showed a shape, or multiple shapes, it was hard to tell, spreading outward from directly below the boat in a pattern that looked almost geometric. Perfect circles expanding like ripples, but at 3,000 feet depth. "Pull the net," Marcus said immediately. "Pull it now." Reyna gave the order and the winch engaged, beginning the slow process of retrieving the net from 3,200 feet down. It would take 40 minutes at standard speed. But they could hear something was wrong within the first 5 minutes. The winch was straining, motor laboring harder than it should, as if the net had caught on something or filled with far more weight than normal. The cable tension gauge climbed into the red zone. "We've got a big haul," Rafael called from the deck, "or we've snagged something." The net finally broke the surface at 7:31 a.m., and even from the wheelhouse, Reyna could see it was wrong. The net was glowing, a pale blue bioluminescence that pulsed rhythmically, and the fish inside weren't moving normally. They seemed suspended, frozen in positions that didn't make sense, as if time had stopped mid-thrash. The crew began the process of hauling the net aboard and emptying it onto the deck. And that's when they saw what they'd caught. Mixed in with the cod and rockfish was something else. Dozens of fish that didn't belong to any species Reyna had ever seen. Translucent, almost colorless, with skin so thin she could see their internal organs pulsing. They had no eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should be, and their mouths were wrong. Too many teeth, arranged in rows that spiraled back into the throat. And they weren't dead. Despite being pulled from crushing pressure at 3,200 feet to surface level, despite being in a net for 90 minutes, they were alive and moving with disturbing coordination. "What the hell are these?" Thomas muttered, prodding one with his boot. The fish responded by twisting toward him with speed that shouldn't be possible, mouth opening to reveal those spiral teeth. "Don't touch them," Reyna ordered, coming down from the wheelhouse. "Isolate them from the rest of the catch. We need to document this and contact NOAA." But what happened next made her realize they'd made a terrible mistake in bringing these things aboard. The largest of the translucent fish, easily 4 feet long, began to change. Its bioluminescent organs brightened until they were painful to look at, and it started releasing something into the air. Not water, not any fluid Reyna could see, but the air around the fish began to shimmer like heat distortion. And the smell hit them. Not rotting fish, not ocean smell, but something chemical and sweet, like overripe fruit mixed with chlorine. James Lee, the cook, who'd been standing closest to the pile of translucent fish, stopped moving suddenly, just froze mid-step, staring at the largest fish with an expression Reyna would later describe to investigators as rapturous. His eyes went distant, unfocused, and then he smiled. Not his normal smile, but something wider, more vacant, like a mask of happiness with nothing behind it. "James?" Reyna called. No response. "James, step back from the fish." Instead, James knelt beside the translucent creature, still smiling, and reached out to touch it. The moment his skin made contact, something passed between them. Reyna saw it, saw the shimmer in the air intensify, saw James's body go rigid. And then he started humming. A low, droning note that had no melody, just a single frequency that resonated in Reyna's chest. "Marcus, get him away from that thing," Reyna ordered. Marcus grabbed James's shoulder to pull him back, and the moment they made contact, Marcus's expression changed too. The concern drained from his face, replaced by that same vacant smile, and within seconds, he was humming the same note as James. Reyna felt ice flood her veins. This was spreading. Whatever these fish were releasing, whatever they were doing, it was contagious. "Everyone get back," she shouted. "Away from the translucent fish, now." But it was already too late. Brad and Kyle, the seasonal workers, had been examining the fish from the other side of the pile. They'd been exposed to the shimmer, breathed in whatever chemical the fish were releasing. Their eyes glazed over, and they started humming, joining the chorus that was growing louder every second. The sound resonated through the deck, through the metal hull of the boat, vibrating in Reyna's bones. She ran for the wheelhouse, grabbing the radio mic. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the Pacific Horizon. Coordinates 46.2 north, 127.8 west. We have a medical emergency. Crew exhibiting altered mental state, require immediate assistance." The radio crackled, but no voice responded. Just static underlaid with that same humming frequency, as if whatever was happening on the deck was being broadcast through the radio itself. Reyna switched frequencies, tried the Coast Guard emergency channel, tried every frequency she knew. Nothing but static and that terrible humming. When she looked back at the deck, 7 crew members were now standing in a circle around the pile of translucent fish. David, the engineer, had emerged from below and joined them. Raphael, Miguel, Thomas, all of them humming in unison, all smiling that empty smile. The fish on the deck were glowing brighter, and Reyna could see the air around them was now visibly distorted, reality bending like a lens. Only Marcus seemed to be fighting it. His smile flickered, expression struggling between vacant happiness and terror. as if two minds were warring in his skull. He turned toward the wheelhouse and locked eyes with Reyna. For just a second, she saw her first mate, saw the man she'd sailed with for 8 years, and his eyes were screaming for help. Then the smile returned, wider than before, and he started walking with the others. They moved in formation toward the port rail, still humming, still smiling. Reyna screamed at them to stop, ran down from the wheelhouse and grabbed Raphael's arm, trying physically to pull him away from whatever trance held him. But Raphael was strong, stronger than he should be, and he brushed her off without even breaking his stride. His skin where she touched him was ice cold despite the relatively mild weather. That's when Reyna made the decision that saved her life. She ran back to the wheelhouse, sealed herself inside by jamming the door mechanism, and locked every window. The wheelhouse wasn't airtight, but it was enough separation from whatever chemical compound those fish were releasing. Through the salt-streaked windows, she watched her crew climb over the rail one by one and step into the ocean. They didn't jump, didn't fall. They stepped off deliberately, as if climbing into a bathtub, and disappeared beneath the surface. The water barely rippled. Within 3 minutes, all 8 were gone. Reyna was alone on the Pacific horizon, 200 miles from shore, with a deck full of fish that shouldn't exist and a radio that wouldn't transmit anything but static. She didn't move for 20 minutes, just sat in the captain's chair trying to process what she'd witnessed. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't hold the radio mic. Her mind kept replaying Marcus's eyes, that moment of terrible awareness before the smile took over. Then she heard it, scratching on the wheelhouse door. Reyna's blood went cold. The door was sealed from inside. Nobody could get in. But the scratching continued, slow and deliberate, fingernails on metal. She forced herself to look through the door window and saw nothing. Empty deck, just the pile of fish and the nets still lying where the crew had abandoned them. But the scratching didn't stop. It was coming from below the door, from inside the wheelhouse. Reyna turned slowly and saw water seeping in through the ventilation grate near the floor. Just a trickle at first, but growing, spreading across the deck plates. And the water was wrong. Too thick, too dark, and it moved against gravity, flowing uphill toward her boots. She scrambled onto the captain's chair, pulling her feet up, watching in horror as the water pooled and began to take shape. A hand. Reaching up from the puddle, fingers elongated and translucent. Skin stretched thin over bones that bent in too many places. Then another hand. A head beginning to emerge, features indistinct, face blurred like melting wax. It was trying to climb out of the water, trying to reach her. And Reyna knew with absolute certainty that if it touched her, she'd become like the others. She'd smile and hum and walk into the ocean where something waited 3,000 feet down. She grabbed the fire axe from its emergency housing and smashed the hands, shattering them into water that splashed across the floor. But they reformed within seconds, rising again. Reyna kept smashing, kept breaking them apart, for hours. Her arms burned, muscles screaming, but she couldn't stop. Every time she destroyed the water constructs, they came back, and they were getting better at forming, getting more detailed, more human-looking. At 2:17 p.m., exactly 7 hours after the crew had gone overboard, everything stopped. The water constructs collapsed and didn't reform. The scratching ceased. The air cleared, and Reyna could breathe easier. She waited another hour before unsealing the wheelhouse door and stepping onto the deck with the axe still in her trembling hands. The translucent fish were gone. Not dead. Not rotting on the deck where she'd seen them. Just gone. The regular catch was still there, cod and rockfish, exactly where they'd been before. But the strange fish had vanished completely, leaving only wet outlines on the deck where they'd been lying. And the air still smelled faintly of that chemical sweetness. Raina checked the radio. Normal static now, no humming. She broadcast Mayday, and this time received a response. The Coast Guard would take 8 hours to reach her position. She spent those 8 hours documenting everything she could with the boat's cameras, collecting water samples from the puddles that had formed in the wheelhouse, bagging a few scales she found from the translucent fish. Evidence. Proof that she wasn't insane. The Coast Guard cutter arrived at 10:52 p.m. They found Raina in the wheelhouse, exhausted and traumatized, but physically unharmed. They found the Pacific Horizon in good working order with a normal catch in the hold. They found no crew. A helicopter search the next morning covered a 100-square-mile area and found nothing. No bodies, no debris, no sign that 8 men had gone overboard from that location. The investigation lasted 6 months. Raina told them everything, showed them the camera footage, gave them the water samples and scales. The footage showed the crew's strange behavior, showed them walking over the rail, but the resolution wasn't high enough to clearly capture the translucent fish or the shimmer in the air. The water samples came back as normal seawater with trace amounts of an unidentified organic compound. The scales were sent to NOAA's Deep Sea Research Division and disappeared into bureaucratic limbo. The official conclusion was that the crew experienced mass psychosis triggered by exposure to an unknown, naturally occurring toxin released by deep-sea fish. The recommendation was to avoid trawling below 3,000 feet in that region, pending further study. The Pacific Horizon was deemed seaworthy and returned to the fishing company. The families of the 8 crew members received death certificates listing drowning as cause of death, though no bodies were ever recovered. But what the official report didn't mention, what Raina learned later through informal conversations with the Coast Guard chemist who analyzed her samples, was that the unidentified organic compound in the water wasn't from Earth. Not in the sense of extraterrestrial origin, but in the sense of not matching any known biological markers from any cataloged species on the planet. The molecular structure was wrong, the chemist said, like it had been designed rather than evolved. He was told to classify it as unknown and stop investigating. Raina hasn't returned to fishing, hasn't set foot on a boat since the Coast Guard dropped her off in Newport. She spent 6 months in therapy, diagnosed with PTSD and survivor's guilt, prescribed medications she doesn't take because the nightmares are worse when her mind is dulled. Because the nightmares are important, they're warnings. In the dreams, she's back in the wheelhouse watching her crew walk overboard. But this time when they enter the water, she can see what's below the surface. Cities. Vast underwater cities stretching across the ocean floor at crushing depths, built from something that looks like coral and metal fused together, glowing with that same bioluminescent blue. And the cities are full of things that used to be human. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, all smiling that empty smile, all moving in synchronized patterns like cells in a massive organism. And in the deepest parts, in trenches that humans have never explored, she sees the things that built those cities. Creatures so large that her mind can't fully process them, existing at depths where pressure should crush any living thing. They're old, ancient beyond comprehension, and they're waiting. The translucent fish are scouts, she understands in the dream. Bait. Lures to bring humans down to the deep places where pressure and darkness can change them into something useful. Raina had her blood tested by a private lab 3 months ago, not trusting any government facility. The results showed trace amounts of that same unidentified compound in her bloodstream. The lab tech said it was inert, not causing any physiological changes. But it was there. Permanent. A marker. And it was growing, very slowly, accumulating in her tissues at a rate of approximately 0.3% per month. At current progression, the lab tech estimated she'd reach critical concentration in about 3 years. She knows what that means. In 3 years, she'll hear the humming again. She'll smile that empty smile and walk toward the nearest body of water. And this time, there'll be no wheelhouse door to seal, no barrier between her and what waits below. She'll walk into the ocean like her crew did, and something will be waiting to welcome her home. But here's the part that keeps Raina truly awake at night, the part she hasn't told investigators or therapists or anyone. The Pacific Horizon wasn't the only boat. She's been monitoring Coast Guard reports, fishing industry news, marine incident databases. In the years since her crew disappeared, 3 more deep-sea trawlers have reported similar incidents. Different locations, always at depths exceeding 3,000 feet, always involving translucent fish with bioluminescent organs. 2 boats lost their entire crews. The third, like Raina, had 1 survivor who sealed themselves away in time. And the incidents are increasing. Not just trawlers anymore, but research submarines, deep-sea mining operations, undersea cable maintenance crews. Anything that goes deep enough encounters them. The translucent fish, the shimmer, the humming, the smile. The military has classified something. She knows that from reading between the lines of redacted reports she's found through Freedom of Information requests. They know more than they're saying. They've known for years. Raina obtained sonar maps of the coordinates where she lost her crew. Maps from before March 2024 and maps from after. In the before maps, the ocean floor at 3,200 feet shows normal topography. Mud, rock, the usual sediment. In the after maps, taken 4 months later, there are structures. Massive geometric formations that shouldn't exist, arranged in patterns that look almost like circuit boards when viewed from above. And the structures are spreading, growing across the ocean floor at a measurable rate. Deep-sea mapping organizations are calling it a previously unknown geological formation, naturally occurring mineral deposits crystallizing in unusual patterns. But Raina knows what they are. They're the cities she sees in her dreams. They're growing, rising toward the surface. At current growth rates, they'll reach depths accessible to standard commercial diving within 30 years. Within 50 years, they'll breach the surface. Whatever lives at 3,200 feet down is building something. Using the translucent fish to gather human subjects, converting them, incorporating them into the structure. A colony organism, vast and ancient, finally expanding after millennia of dormancy. The deep-sea trenches of Earth have been explored less than 5%. 95% unmapped, unknown, unexplored. Which means 95% of whatever's down there has never been disturbed. Until now. Until commercial fishing pushed deeper, mining operations drilled further, submarines descended lower. Humans kept knocking on the door, and finally, something answered. The translucent fish aren't a species. They're a response, a defense mechanism, a recruitment tool. And they're only the beginning. Raina received a phone call last week from a number she didn't recognize. She answered and heard only humming. That same droning frequency from the deck of the Pacific Horizon broadcast through her phone speaker. She hung up immediately and blocked the number, but 3 more unknown numbers called that night, all humming. She stopped answering her phone entirely. Yesterday, she received mail, an envelope with no return address containing a single photograph printed on standard copy paper. The photo showed her crew, all 8 of them, standing together on what appeared to be the deck of a ship smiling at the camera. But the ship deck behind them wasn't metal. It was that same coral metal hybrid from her dreams. And behind them in the background, blurred but visible, were structures, the underwater cities. The photo was dated March 11th, 2025, almost exactly 1 year after they'd gone overboard. They were alive, in whatever way that word applied to what they'd become. And they wanted her to see that. Wanted her to know they were waiting for her. That in 3 years, when the compound in her blood reached critical concentration, she'd walk into the ocean and join them. And she'd smile while doing it, because by then, it wouldn't feel like death. It would feel like going home. Raina has made preparations, written everything down, stored copies in multiple locations, sent sealed documents to journalists with instructions to open them if she disappears. She's trying to warn people, trying to make them understand that the deep places of the ocean aren't empty. That pressure and darkness and cold have allowed things to exist in forms we've never imagined. That we've been knocking on their door for decades with our fishing nets and submarines and offshore drilling. And now they've finally decided to answer. But nobody wants to hear it. Because accepting what she's saying means accepting that 71% of Earth's surface, the parts covered by ocean, are not under human control and never were. Means accepting that there are entities down there, ancient and vast, that consider humanity a resource to be harvested when convenient. Means accepting that every beach, every harbor, every coastal city is a border with something we don't understand and can't fight. Raina moved to Colorado 6 months ago. Denver, a mile high, as far from the ocean as she could get in the United States. But yesterday she noticed something terrible. The tap water in her apartment building has started tasting different. Slightly sweet, slightly chemical. She had it tested privately. The results came back showing trace amounts of that same unidentified organic compound. The compound that shouldn't exist. The compound that's growing in her blood. It's in the water supply. Not just ocean water anymore. Fresh water. The municipal water system. Which means it's spreading faster than she thought. Means whatever lives in the deep places has found a way to reach inland, to touch people who never go near the ocean, to mark them just like it marked her. The concentration is low, barely detectable, but it's there. And if it's in Denver's water supply, it's probably in others. Maybe all of them. Raina understands now why the military classified the information, why NOAA stopped investigating, why the fishing company quietly retired the Pacific Horizon and pretended nothing unusual happened. Because the truth is too big to fight and too terrifying to announce. Humanity lost a war it never knew it was fighting. The deep places of the ocean have been quietly claiming people for years, maybe decades. And by the time anyone realizes the scope, it'll be too late to stop. She'll walk into water in 3 years. She knows that now. Accepts it. But before then, she's going to make sure someone, anyone, understands what's waiting down there. Because her crew walked into the ocean smiling, and they're still smiling in the photographs. And Raina knows with terrible certainty that one day, millions of people will smile that same smile and walk toward the nearest body of water. And something ancient and vast will welcome them home, to the deep places where pressure crushes and darkness never ends, and humanity becomes something else entirely. The ocean covers 71% of the planet. We've explored less than 5%, which means 95% of what lives down there has never seen sunlight, never been photographed, never been documented. And maybe that's been a mercy. Maybe that 95% has been allowing us to exist on the surface, tolerating our presence, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. That moment has come. The cities are rising. The translucent fish are spreading. The humming grows louder every year. And soon, very soon, everyone will hear it. Everyone will smile. And everyone will walk toward the water. Because by then, it won't feel like an ending. It'll feel like a beginning. Like going home to a place we've always belonged. To the deep. To the dark. To what waits 3,000 feet down, where the pressure crushes human bones, and the cold stops human hearts, and something else begins. Reina Cortez knows she's going to die in the ocean. She just hopes she's wrong about how many people will follow her.